Hello and welcome. Welcome to my channel, and my name is Freddy. So this is where I'll be talking about my reading history in February. So this is my February 2022 wrap up. I finished 7 books altogether, and I am thinking about sharing my experience today, because today is a Sunday. I actually planned to do this wrap-up video in the morning, but yeah, something happened. This morning I actually woke up with good hair, seriously, and it was good. My mood was good, but then stuff kept happening. I was sniffling, and then whenever I was trying to record, I kept pressing the stop recording button accidentally. I don't know why, but things happened, and so I ended up not recording any wrap-up videos in the morning, and so that's how I end up doing this now in the evening. It's 5 p.m. right now actually, and I have my tea with me, and then I actually made like a pot of tea. Not exactly a pot, this is like a jug of tea. So kind of like a jug of Earl Grey tea because it's 5 p.m. here. So 5 p.m. is kind of like tea time here, and you're supposed to have it with like tea or a pot or a jug of coffee, maybe have a bit of things to munch, stuff like fried crackers or fried fritters or something like that. But I don't have anything to eat because I just had my lunch a bit late. I had my lunch at 2, and also I'm planning to go to the night market later, and I'm just thinking, hey, why not just do a wrap-up video before I head to the night market? So let's start this video, and after that I'm gonna go to the night market. And yeah, let's start with the first book, and that will be Sijie's Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress. So this book was originally written in French, and it was translated into the English by Rilke. So this book, it centers around 2 main characters, the narrator and also his friend Loos. So this story takes place somewhere in the Sichuan province, rural Sichuan province in China in the 1970s, when China was still being ruled by the Maoist government. And so the narrator and his friend, their parents were actually accused of some minor crimes by the government, and so these teenagers are sort of deemed as kind of like young scholars. And at that time there was this program in China in which a bunch of people, especially those from the cities with a fair amount of education, are being sent to the rural countryside in order to undergo re-education program, which is basically amounts to working in the fields, farms, and working at the mines, sort of stuff. And so the narrator and Luo finds themselves in rural Sichuan, and then they meet this girl around their age, whom is called Little Seamstress. And this character is going to be called Little Seamstress all the way until the end of this book. This girl does not get any name, and I think it's kind of significant, but I don't really want to talk too much about it because it's going to feel kind of spoilery. Anyway, back to the plot. So Luo falls in love with this girl, and Luo is able to sort of court this girl with his captivating storytelling ability. While they're there, they also meet another teenage boy who was sent for a re-education program as well. And this boy happened to have a stash of banned books. And so Luo and the narrator are trying to bargain with this boy in order to get some of his books, maybe all of his books, because they think that with the books that are owned by this boy, they can actually use the story in order to help Luo to court the this little seamstress even more, and maybe even, I don't know, according to them, introduce a world beyond the village to this little seamstress, which is kind of patronizing, but it's kind of like their way of sort of, I don't know, educating this little seamstress. And this becomes their motivation in this story, and basically this is how and where the plot takes off. We follow what happens when they try to work out a way on getting these banned books and what happens after that. So overall, I think that this book, for me, it is kind of lukewarm. Basically, this novel amounts to the story of two teenage boys trying to impress a girl, and all the the discussions around oppressive regime, banned books, banned knowledge, and stuff like that. Those kind of serve as a sexy backdrop for this story of teenage love, and I think that didn't really work for me very much, as in it's not particularly memorable. It's quite forgettable to me. I don't think that I will remember much about this story months or years from now. That being said, I kind of like the ending of this book, and it's not particularly mind-blowing. It feels kind of organic, but it's decent. I do like the ending of this book. So if you are interested in this work, do check it out. Yeah. Although it's not exactly something that I would scream off the rooftop about. So moving on to the next book. Now this book is in fact something that I will scream from any rooftop. This is Djinn Patrol on the Purple Line by Deepa Anappara. I actually did not expect much from this book because it has a child protagonist narrator, but I think that was the element that really surprised me. So basically this book is about Jai, who is a young boy living in the slums in an unnamed city in India. So he lives with his parents and also his older sister. Their family is quite good. I mean, their family is quite a happy family. It's not exactly like an abusive family of sorts. So that's a nice element over there. Jai has you can say that Jai as a character, even though he lives in poverty, but he has this a nice family background. Now he lives in this slum called Basti in this book, and so do their neighbors. They all live in this community, and so one day one of the neighbors' kids and also Jai's schoolmates goes missing. So this kid, the disappearance of this kid actually brings some panic and worry among the community, but somehow the police aren't exactly doing a lot about this kid's disappearance, because the police is pretty much in this book, the institution is kind of like infested with corruption, and they are not really responsive to whatever the inhabitants of these slums are. Whenever they ask for help from the police, they don't really respond to them. And Jai actually takes it upon himself to investigate the disappearance of this missing kid, because Jai happens to be someone who is a big fan of crime and procedural dramas, and Jai is helped by his two other schoolmates who are also the same age as his. Basically, so these kids are actually kids of elementary school age. They're very young. Now, the beginning of this book feels kind of like a sunny and cheery sort of a book in which it has a child investigator. investigating crimes that happen in their community. So it does have that vibe. But then what this book does is that it is a literary fiction, after all, that is rooted in reality. And so as you read further and further into this book, the tone becomes even more and more and more dark. And at the end of this book, it is super dark. Compared to the beginning, it is so different. And so I really love this tonal shift. Another thing that I appreciate about this book is that, okay, I'm never really a big fan of child narrators, because I usually encounter child narrators that are written as wise beyond their years. Oh my gosh, that makes me vomit. Child narrators who are smart for whatever reason, who sound mature compared to the other adult characters in the book. Oh my gosh, get me away from those. Basically, one of those precocious child narrators. Jai in this book is not those. Jai starts out as someone who is very naive, not just but very naive, who thinks in this fantastical terms, like he only sees what is in front of him. He's not someone with vision. He's not someone with a high level of maturity. He's just a kid, and this book really portrays him as a kid who views things in front of him in this kind of sunny way. Okay, so, but as the story progresses, we slowly see how Jai sort of responds to the darkness that he gradually discovers that are actually existing around him. And it's really interesting to see how he reacts to that while still maintaining his childlike innocence and naivety. So this book is a wonderful coming-of-age novel in which it really shows how a character goes from a state of being innocent to another state of discovering the crappier side of real life. I really like that kind of stuff, and I think this book does it really well, not only through how the character how the main character develops, but also through its tonal shift. So I really recommend this one if you want to check it out. And I also really recommend this one if you are the kind of person who does not like child narrators. So, yeah, wonderful stuff. 5 out of 5 stars for me. So, moving on to the third book that I finished, and that would be Pachinko by Jin Lee. So, Pachinko is a really popular book, and I've always been wanting to read this one for a long time now already, and I finally finished it. I wondered why I did not start this book much earlier, but who cares? It has happened. I already finished it, and I loved it. 5 out of 5 stars. So Pachinko is a historical fiction / multi-generational family saga about this Korean family who lives in Japan starting in the early 1920s. So we follow the life of one woman named Sunja since she is a teenage girl, in which we start to follow her while she's still living in the island of Yeongdo in the south of Korea. And so there, she and her mother, they're taking care of their boarding house, from which they earn their livelihood. And then one day, a preacher from the north of Korean peninsula, he comes to lodge in a boarding house, and he contracts tuberculosis, and his name is Isak. And so they've been taking care of Isak and tending to him until he's healthy at the boarding house. At the same time, Sunja, who is still a teenage girl at that time, she encounters another man who is somewhat mysterious but kind of charming and powerful. This sort of like a darkish, broody masculine figure named Ko Han-soo, and they start an affair with each other, which leads to Sunja being pregnant, but also at the same time with the knowledge that Ko Han-soo actually already has a family in Osaka, Japan. So knowing this, Sunja actually breaks off their relationship. Isak, who knows about this, decides to repay their kindness by marrying Sunja in order to spare Sunja and her mom the shame of having a child out of wedlock. And afterwards, Isak and Sunja moves to Osaka, Japan, where they migrate there. And so this story takes off from there, in which we see how Sunja's life sort of progresses and evolves in a way when as she navigates life in Japan as a Korean. Now, a little bit of context is that around the time when, since Sunja is a little girl, since Sunja was born in the early 20th century, Korea was colonized by the Japanese, and so for Sunja, she has not really seen like a time in which Korea was free from the Japanese rule, and so she has always known a life of hardship and poverty, and being a sort of a second-class citizen even in her own country. And so when she moves to Osaka with this preacher, she is going to continue that life of being the oppressed minority, of being a second-class citizen, even in a new place. So this book explores a lot of the themes of the loss of homeland, the loss of identity, and what does it mean to be a group of minority living in a place in which you're constantly discriminated against. And I find that this book tells that story really powerfully, mainly because the writing is quite simple. It does not care to be flowery. It does not try to be super literary. It's just really simple. It only cares about telling its story. And I think that's why it's really effective. And it feels kind of intimate also, because we get to be, we get to feel closer to the different characters in this book. Now, this book has plenty of characters, not just Sunja, but also Sunja's kids and grandkids, and also the other characters who will interact and have some relationship with Sunja and the kids and her grandkids and everyone. So this book is going to have a lot of characters, but essentially we are going to be like kind of intimate with many of these characters as we follow their lives through events such as the World War, and when things get really difficult for this family who even after many years, this is not exactly a spoiler because this is kind of like the main thing in this book, even after many years they still live in a situation in which they face oppression and discrimination from day to day. And yeah, this is a really emotional read, and I really love it. I really like the way it ends also. I'm not gonna tell you what it is, but it's not exactly kind of like a clear-cut ending, but I really like it. I just like the vibe. So yeah, that is a good book. I think many people gave it high ratings. I certainly count myself as one of those people. So moving on to the fourth book that I read in February, that would be Gentlemen Prefer Blondes by Anita Loos. So before I saw this book at an online store, I didn't know anything about this book. I didn't know anything about this author. I've not heard anything about Anita Loos before. I didn't know that this book was actually turned into a movie in the 50s that would star, Marilyn Monroe, and her pink dress. Even though I do think that, from pop culture osmosis, I think I sort of knew about that kind of, iconography, that whole thing, but I didn't know it actually came from this book. So this book was also a wonderful read. So here we have a character. Her name is Lorelei Lee. So Lorelei Lee lives in New York as a young woman in the 1920s, and so she's living a life that is quite lavish. But basically she's able to do so because she is in a relationship with her sugar daddy named Gus Eisman. So she is able to sort of like have good food, good drinks. She's able to shop a lot. She's able to live in a wonderful apartment in New York at that time. And one day Gus Eisman wants to sponsor Lorelei a trip to Europe. And so Lorelei embarks on this trip to Europe with her friend, and as they begin this trip, which starts from London to Paris and all of the different places in Europe, the story gets more interesting as we see how Lorelei is kind of like charming, or rather manipulating her way through these cities together with her friend Dorothy, and how she's able to kind of like charm the men, especially in order to get what she wants, which basically means good place to stay in, good food to eat, and also shopping. She loves shopping. So Lorelei is a character that can be considered as a gold digger, and basically that's kind of like the term that is used to describe this character in many places that talks about this book. And gold digger is kind of like a it is a term with a negative connotation. But reading this book, also another thing that you sort of learn about Lorelei is that from superficially you feel that Lorelei is kind of like this shallow and vapid character who only cares about materialistic desires, and who only cares about having fun and shopping and all those things. But when you read this story further, you realize that Lorelei is kind of like a character who is intelligent in a particular way. She is intelligent in a way that she knows that she lacks knowledge in certain things, but she doesn't care. She is confident of the intelligence that she has already in her, and basically her intelligence that allows her to kind of read the room and be very savvy with people and interaction, which definitely allows her to manipulate and charm her way, even charming her way out of the troubles that she ends up encountering on her trip to Europe. So this book is really funny. The story itself is written like a series of journal entries that Lorelei herself writes, and so it is written in a first-person narrator point of view, and you could totally hear Lorelei's voice in here. And this book employs a lot of kind of like misspellings, which I think really shows us the kinds of personality that Lorelei as a character, the personality traits that she exhibits, which further shows that her misspellings shows that she doesn't care. She doesn't care that she writes those things wrongly, but she simply writes them. And another thing that this also shows us is that she is a character with great motivation and drive. Like when she wants something, she knows, and she knows how to get it. She knows how to devise a plan to get that thing. Or when she gets into trouble, she knows what exactly to do, what buttons to push, how to manipulate certain people in order to get out of that trouble. So I actually watched the movie after I finished this book. I felt that the movie did not particularly portray this very intelligent side of Lorelei, although it was kind of entertaining as this book also. But I feel that this book really shows how Lorelei is a character who is quite smart and cunning. So in a way, I feel like this book is a bit like a picaresque novel featuring a character who is not necessarily from the upper class, but knows how to game the system, and just so that she can get what she wants. It's a really wonderful book. I really recommend everyone to try it. Apparently it's a modern classic that I did not know about before. And yeah, definitely, if you see this book anywhere, you should try it. I think there's a sequel for this book. I would love to try that also. So moving on to another book, which is definitely a widely recognized classic. So I read this while when I had my trip home. I had this book at home in East Malaysia. So this was George Orwell's Animal Farm. So it's a really short book. I actually finished this only in one day. I was really curious to see how I would experience this book, because I know that many people love this book. The ratings on Goodreads are really high, and based on what I see around the Instagram bookish community, a lot of people give rave reviews about this book. So I read it and I thought that it was just okay. Maybe it's because of the time in which I read it. Honestly, I'm not sure, but when I read this book, I didn't feel so much impact. But first, what this book is about. So basically, this book is about a bunch of farm animals led by the main pig. His name is Napoleon. This bunch of farm animals are revolting against their human owner, and one day they are able to drive away this human owner, and so that sort of marks the start of their journey in self-governance. But once they're able to claim victory over the human owner, once they're able to kind of be independent and rule themselves, it appears that there are going to be a lot of hiccups, a lot of issues. Things are not going to go smoothly within this animal community with different heads. Different animals are trying to do different things, going to different directions that would inevitably lead to rebellion and killings and infightings and stuff like that. So this book is a very cynical book, and but I think that from many of the reviews that I've seen about this book, it's kind of like many of them are trying to draw parallels between this book to various kinds of regimes in the past. Stalinism especially, that's really popular among the reviews. A lot of people trying to liken it to a criticism towards different kinds of isms, such as socialisms, which is also another popular opinion. Now, I'm not going to do any of that, because I feel that this book, at its core, it is not necessarily a book that criticizes particular regimes or isms. I mean, maybe the author has that intention, but I feel that this book is very flexible. It can apply to various situations across various eras, various civilizations, because this book is very universal. It's basically about how people in a society react to power, how those who hold the power react to it, respond to it, what they decide to do to it, how those that are being ruled react towards the leader who have the power. So basically it's just pretty much about the regular people's, dynamics with power. And when someone has the ability to decide to do with all the power that they have, if they have a particular kind of agenda, how would they do, and how would the society react to it? It's just a really universal story. But that's pretty much it to this book. When I was reading this book, I was like, there wasn't really anything shocking about this. I mean, that's pretty much how people do when it comes to power in a society. When I was reading this book, I knew that it was an allegory, but I just couldn't really shake off this image from my head that all of these animal characters are just stand-ins for humans. Like, I couldn't see them as animal characters. I just literally see them as humans with animal names and animal qualities. Maybe it just goes to show that allegory novels aren't exactly for me, because when I was reading this book, I thought that there was nothing new. Everything was spoon-fed to me. Like, when I was a kid, maybe this book would have had more impact. Maybe I would be like, oh my gosh, this is like my coming of age moment. When I realized the society is really that bad. But I read it as a 28-year-old and was like, okay, so what? That is how it is. It could be better, but that's how people react. It does not really surprise me, and so for me the experience was kind of like a bit lukewarm. But I do think that this book really certainly deserves its classic status, because I do think that it has that universal appeal, and I like the fact that there are different layers of nuance in this book about how people react to power. I appreciate that. But yeah, in terms of enjoyment, I wasn't really enjoying this book. So yeah, moving on from one cynical book to another, and that would be Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert. So this would be the sequel to the first book, Dune, which I finished in December last year. I love that one. Now, it's kind of difficult to say in more details what Dune Messiah is about without spoiling a lot of Dune, because this book is, it's a sequel. It starts with the end of Dune, but basically what we have is that Dune Messiah still follows Paul, which is the main protagonist from Dune. So Paul had his family, or rather his house of origin, being murdered, and his house has been kind of like assigned to take care this planet called Arrakis, which is like a planet that is overflowing with a substance called spice that everyone wants to control. So this whole story takes place in an kind of like interplanetary setting, far in the future. So basically, Paul has his family killed when when his family ends up controlling the spice trade in this planet called Arrakis. Only Paul and his mother survives, and Dune pretty much follows how Paul is trying to get revenge on that with the help of some of the local people in the planet of Arrakis called Fremen. So, I'm not going to tell you what happens in Dune, how that story concludes. Let's just say that in Dune Messiah, we still see Paul, and Paul certainly has some level of power, and while we know that Paul is the protagonist in the first book, here he's still the protagonist, but we are starting to see that people are starting to fighting against him, including those who used to ally with him in Dune, are kind of trying to undermine his authority in this book. So this book is going to contain much more plotting and scheming, a lot of family drama, but this book contains much more political drama, and pretty much all drama in this book. And I don't know how else to say, but just the fact that I really like how this book serves as a nice conclusion to Paul's story. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about this book. Dune, the Dune Chronicles actually contain 6 books. I now have all 6 books. I'm planning to read all 6 of them. This is the second book. But the second book is kind of like a conclusion of the story of Paul, the protagonist. So we're going to follow a new set of characters, at least new protagonists in Children of Dune, the third book. I'm really looking forward to reading that one soon. So yeah, that's Dune Messiah. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Even though it didn't have like much of the same gravitas as Dune. I mean, Dune was like, it starts out with this really loud bang, and Dune Messiah is just kind of like trying to tone it down a little bit, but it still does so in this kind of like elegant way. I really love it. And the dramatic style, the dramatic writing and the dialogue, the soap opera feel to it, it's still there. So yeah, moving on to the last book I finished in February, and that would be Sula by Toni Morrison. So I actually intended to read this book simply because it was short. I didn't expect much from it. But I ended up loving this book because I feel like this book shows us it sort of surprises me that this book is a good story about friendship, especially friendship between women. I really like stories that talks about friendship between women. So what happens in Sula is that we have this 2 girls, Nell and Sula. They live in this this part of Medallion, Ohio, that is populated by the black people. The story takes place sometime in the 1920s, and it goes all the way until the 1960s, actually. So we follow how Nell and Sula are like really best friends when they are kids, and then something happened to them. Something traumatic happened to them, and then afterwards Nell gets married, and then Sula pretty much leaves this small town for a while. And then years later, when Sula returns, by that time Nell already has a few kids, and Sula returns with a somewhat of a different personality. I mean, she still retains the core personality. Sula is a bit of a more flighty character, whereas Nell is a bit of a more emotionally stable kind. So when Sula returns from her years of wandering outside of Medallion, she kind of does things in a way that, especially because of her personality, which is kind of like wild and free, she starts to sleep with various men. Sula starts to attract the kind of like hatred among the townspeople because they aren't really comfortable with the way Sula lives her life. And even so, Nell and Sula remains friends, but their friendship are starting to get even more tense, basically. But what I really like about this book is how it shows that, the friendship that these 2 women have, despite all of the things that are happening around them, how the townspeople are reacting to Sula after her return. The friendship feels real. It doesn't feel like the kind of friendship in which you expect only the good things, but it also comes with a lot of baggage. And this book explores those baggage really well, like how both sides of this friendship, how Nell and Sula actually have their own baggage, and how they kind of like want to deal with that, but at the same time they also have some miscommunication issues with each other, and how that sort of hinders their friendship from progressing even more towards a healthier point. And yeah, it's a very compelling story of a friendship. This book is also it also has some nice social commentary, especially on issues such as racism, colorism, class issues, especially the kinds of issues that plague the black community in America at that time. But at its core, this book is I would say, it's a visceral story about the friendship between these two women, and I just really love the way that their friendship evolves, or rather devolves, or I don't know. That's I'm not saying much beyond that. How it changes, yeah. How their friendship changes, or rather matures. But anyway, I really love the ending of this book. It has that really wonderful dramatic feel to it, but the dramatic not in a sense of being like soap opera kind of dramatic, but it's this like really emotional kind of dramatic ending. So yeah, if you have not read this book, really you gotta check it out. Toni Morrison's writing, I found, is not exactly something, by the way, not exactly something that I can digest when I have like pounding anxieties. And last month I definitely have moments in which I was nervous all the time, and I was not able to read Sula at all because I couldn't absorb what was written. So yeah, this is certainly my own experience. I don't think that I will read any Toni Morrison if I ever feel anxious, but her writing is just so good. Usually she would write about details that you would not even expect. She writes in this way that is kind of like very much a show and not tell. And the way that she shows it is that if you simply skim the writing, you might not catch what she wants to convey to you. So I think her writing is certainly very beautiful, and something that you really need a great amount of concentration in order to really appreciate. So I'm really interested in reading more by Toni Morrison after this. This is my second Toni Morrison. So yeah, I still have more of her books in my pile. So yeah, that concludes my February 2022 wrap up. So altogether 7 books. All of them are books that are special in their own ways, even though I would say that some of those books didn't really like, I didn't feel like I really enjoyed them. But yeah, I would still suggest you guys to try any of those 7 books if you are interested, if you have the opportunity to do so. I really had a nice 2022 wrap up. So for March, I think I will have less books for my wrap up video later on, because I will be reading all 6 of my book to price books in March. I didn't finish any of them in February. So much for procrastination. And anyway, so yeah, that's a little bit of sneak peek for March. Not much of a sneak peek actually, but yeah, I'm gonna go to the night market now. So I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching, and have some tea. It's already cold, by the way. Bye.